Hey, it's here. This has been the most miserable, stressful, drama-filled, rumor-laden draft season I can remember, uh, even caring about, like, including when I was a player myself. The year that the Jaguars drafted my eventual replacement in Marcus Stroud, I was less agitated by that draft than I was by this one, and we're not even all the way through it yet. But Daniel Jeremiah is a beacon in this world of shady doings and leaks and people basically with the Texans getting all kinds of flack all over the place from everybody simply because they're not leaking any information to anybody and the pundits are getting agitated. So everybody's all up in arms about draft moves the Texans have or have not made before the draft has even occurred. So I got excited when I saw Daniel Jeremiah. You guys have followed along with this for a while as Daniel Jeremiah has struggled to reconcile what he's hearing and what he believes should happen or teams will do. And this is the one guy that I'll listen to and feel like he's really suffered over his Texans pick. He's not just throwing something out there because a couple of years ago he really thought that the 49ers should take Trey Lance, but he just kept hearing over and over and over and over again that it was going to be Mac Jones, going to be Mac Jones. And ultimately he relented and gave in and he caved and he almost caved. We saw him almost cave earlier this week, but for his final mock draft, this is what he has decided to do.
Well, I keep coming back to common sense because I've heard all this swirling around about what they could do and go in a different direction. They don't have a quarterback. They've got to get one, and to me, it makes the most sense. C.J. Stroud is worthy of the second overall pick. He's better than any quarterback they have currently on their roster in Houston. I know they have other needs, CD. I know there's other places they could go with this pick. But if they leave the first round, they leave those first two picks without their future quarterback, I think it would be a failure.
Okay, so now that doesn't address the fact that, hey, they could do something else with the 12th pick overall to get a quarterback. If Anthony Richardson or Will Levis falls down there, they could do that. But you can't guarantee that. You're gaming it. This is something that I would get excited about. I've kind of fallen in love with Anthony Richardson and just swinging for the fences and see what you got. It's just, I think increasingly we've all grown more and more skeptical that the Texans are going to take a quarterback. And I don't know if any of that, honestly, is based on a single damn actual shred of information that anybody has. It's a whole lot of supposition about what might happen. I would be excited about this. The second part of this mock draft was the thing that I would respect the aggressiveness, especially if it happened in the way that Daniel Jeremiah describes here.
Yeah, no, I've got him picking back to back. I've got him.
So he's talking about the second pick, going third overall.
Going from 12 back up to 3. There's a lot of chatter, folks I talked to, saying the decision at 2 is going to come down to C.J. Stroud versus Will Anderson. And I live in a utopian society, CD, where they can get both, and it wouldn't be that costly. When you look at what it would cost on the trade chart, I think they could get this done with a 2 this year, one of their 2 3s, and a 3 next year, and they're able to get the best defensive player of the draft in Will Anderson.
Yeah, so I would take that in a heartbeat. And I know I have been a Tyreek Hill guy, a Tyree Hill. Man, geez, Tyree Wilson. Okay, I got a long day ahead of me. Damn, I knew it. I think the first time I ever said Tyree Wilson's name, I screwed that up. Finally I got it. Tyree Wilson. I'm starting to get a little bit nervous about Tyree Wilson's foot. We had David Child, the Pro Football Doc, on today, and he injected a little bit of doubt into some of the reasons he's given for not working out for teams. Some of the timeline, the fact that we're not sure if he had hardware inserted or removed after Kevin Johnson and frankly Matt Schaub with his Liz Frank. I'm just worried. I get nervous about foot issues, especially in large guys who have to put a whole lot of torque in that when they're coming around the corner. So I'm A-okay with Will Anderson in that spot, especially for one. Oh, let me give Lopez his due too, because Lopez started saying this just last night. John Lopez. So Landry Locker said that the OG, John Lopez, is saying he believes the Texans are taking C.J. Stroud and is putting it at 60-40. What on draft day is going on right now? 9 more hours. So he did that just this morning. It's getting a little bit crazy. out there. As far as CJ Stroud goes, and I know that a lot of you are on the fence about him and a lot of the flack that's being put out there, I just want to revisit this a little bit because so much of it has been about the S2 cognition test. And like just want to revisit some of the things, some of the negatives about him before all the S2 cognition stuff came out. So PFF has all the same stuff, accurate to every level of the football field, feathery touch, quick processor. That quick processor from the pocket with anticipation throws littered all over his tape. That's a positive. And the S2 cognition test is supposed to be measuring processing skills or processing ability. And I do wonder if some of these opinions have been revised as people start to get this test information back. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. The test and the analytics and everything are supposed to maybe have you fact check yourself or, try to re-examine what you see on film. Okay, now these are the accurate negatives. Performance under pressure was rough this season. That's worrisome considering how big his pockets were in 2022. Arm talent is nothing special, and it suffers when he's on the move. Escapability in the pocket is a concern. Doesn't always feel the rush well. I think those are all valid, and I think that's the thing that is still a little bit of a projection. We've talked about this ad nauseum, is just how much of that issue that he had with pressure in his face or when things broke down was just because he is accustomed to things going so well and he typically had pretty good options, or does he just genuinely lack an ability to adjust that stuff? People say that same thing about Dak Prescott, that's a little bit of, when things are on rhythm and everything's working out according to plan, it's great. If things break down, that's where Dak Prescott makes some of these curious decisions. So, but right there, that's not necessarily an S2 cognition test issue, right? It didn't sound like it, at least. So if we go to our friend Lance Zierlein, who's awesome at what he does, his weaknesses, this is all listed earlier on before the S2 cognition test ever came out. Although I'm pretty sure Lance had, before he ever said anything publicly about it, I believe, or I would assume that Lance had an inkling about that. Hesitance to use his legs can put a cap on his success rate. We've talked about that. Labors to get squared to the target when rolling out. Needs a clearer scan for potential pressure points. And there's one at the very bottom that I thought was notable as I try to make myself disappear here. Interceptions arise when he refuses to come off the primary receiver. And that is where I think Lance may differ from some people in his opinion about just how quick or how fast a processor CJ Stroud is. And it's funny, like processing has become the new term that I don't know, it's more encompassing than just football IQ or anything. A lot of it is just the snappiness with which you make decisions. And it's notable too that some guys who struggle to really process still score high, either on like the old school Wonderlic or the new S2 cognition test. Like I'm not convinced that Will Levis actually knows what the hell he's doing out there. He scored high on the S2 cognition test. CJ Stroud, I think, does some things at like whether it's mental processing, visual, field vision, any of that. I think there's things where I might put CJ and Will Levis in the same boat, and yet those test scores are so divergent. There's something there. Like there's, as we heard from the doctor the other day, or the founder of the S2 cognition test, there's a lot more to read into it than just what's been reported so far. So let's see. Oh, yeah, this is the big issue. This is the big question or issue, and I'm sure a few of you have mentioned it already, that David Mulligetta is the agent for CJ Stroud. And if there's one big thing other than the S2 cognition test that the Texans in particular maybe would have an issue with, it's David Mulligetta. We were out at an appearance last night, Sean Pendergast and Landry and me and Figgy and just about everybody was out there, except the afternoon show because they're in Kansas City. And the one thing that I heard over and over again was Hannah McNair. that Hannah's been much more front and center since really over the past year. She's become increasingly that way. And I think that one thing I've heard pretty resoundingly from listeners, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, people are really, really cool with it. I think they feel like Hannah has perhaps helped guide Cal in the right direction, or maybe was part of, figuring out just exactly what Easterby was and that it was time for Easterby to go. But she's also the one that, remember, turned her back on Deshaun Watson when Deshaun Watson came to shake hands with Cal McNair before the Texans game. And maybe some of you haven't seen that. I should have grabbed the video. She turned her back on Deshaun Watson. Like Hannah does not mess around. Like Hannah is not to be trifled with. And I wonder if that or Cal, or I don't think Caserio would have an issue dealing with Mulligetta. But human beings are human beings, and some things that shouldn't matter or maybe should, and it just matters more to them than it would to you or I. It might be something that precludes the Texans from doing business with him. I'd be surprised. I still don't think that's what the deal is going to be. I'm just not. I can't say with 100% certainty. Black Rain has a point here, and I'm going to say something real quick because I think I've got some stats here coming up. All quarterbacks suffer when pressured up the middle. Brady, Burrow, Herbert, and sometimes Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, that's true. I think that the problem is that they suffered at different degrees, like they're and a lot of the pressure stats for CJ Stroud under pressure just aren't as good. His suffers more than other people do. Now, again, you try to figure out exactly why that is and what happened in the offense and all of that. That's projection for the scouts. If the Texans take CJ Stroud, I won't be second guessing it. Like I won't second guess the S2. I won't second guess really any of the other criticisms of CJ Stroud. The high bar for him, the thing that is really good about him is his anticipation, his ability to throw guys open, despite what people say about his receiver core, which is true. He had an awesome receiver core. Sorry about it. But his ball placement and his ability to hopefully have receivers catch the ball in stride makes a big, big, big difference in this offense. Particularly, look at San Francisco last year. One of the reasons they were so powerful was the guys had really, really great run after the catch. This is CJ himself just yesterday at camp in Kansas City talking about the S2 cognition test.
I'm not a test taker, so I play football for me. But at the end of the day, man, I don't got nothing to prove to nobody, so I'm not going to sit here and explain how I process football. The people who are making the picks know what I can do, so that's all that matters to me. There's a whole bunch of people who know how to coach better, know how to play quarterback better, know how to do everything on social media, but a man in the arena, that's what's tough, is stepping in the arena 10 toes. So, and I'm gonna stand on that, and I know what I can do. I know I can process well. I know if I'm not the smartest quarterback in this draft, I know I'm one of the smartest quarterbacks in the NFL when I step in there tomorrow. So I have that confidence in myself, and I don't think you can play at Ohio State and not be smart. So I don't got nothing to prove to nobody, man. At the end of the day, if you don't trust and believe in me, all I can tell you is watch this.
Okay, so I guess a couple things there. If I were him, I would have left out the part about you can't play at Ohio State and not be smart. Like this isn't an anti-Ohio State take. There've been plenty of really brilliant people and plenty of really dumb people come out of any school. But he's supporting his college there, and relying on his college resume to show what he's done. And you can't take that away from him. He's kind of stuck in a rock on a hard place. And I think Vince Young went through this when the Wonderlic scores were an issue or a topic with him. And it's a rough spot for a guy to be in because, people are talking about this one thing that's a check against you. I think CJ, for the most part, handled that the right way. He probably could have had a little bit more of a prepared statement to more succinctly just say, look, the scores are what the scores are. I can control what I can control, and that's what I worry about. The longer you tend to go with stuff like that, it becomes more of a story. It gives more jackasses like me stuff to talk about. Some of the responses to that from various people on Twitter. Think all you want. Never say this out loud. Come on, man. Saying that he's not a test taker. I was fine with it. Saying you're not a test taker, he probably could have phrased it differently. Let's see. Somebody in his camp not doing their job. This isn't the first questionable thing I've heard him say during this process. He's not taking media training seriously. If he won't take this seriously, what else will he let slip if he doesn't enjoy it? This is the part, like, if you want to try to put things in context in terms of what you see on the field versus what an S2 cognition test might say. Bryce Young here. This is the Pro Football Focus passing grades versus Power 5 opponents when defenses disguise their coverages. So take this for whatever it's worth, though we won't get too nerdy about this. But when defenses disguise their coverages, how well did quarterbacks presumably do at figuring that out and beating the coverage? Bryce Young did very, very well. Hendon Hooker, who didn't score that great on at least his first S2 cognition test. We're pretty sure he was the guy that the founder was talking about where the circumstances were a little screwed up, but he does have a bad score floating out there. He was the second best amongst this group. CJ Stroud was third, and then Will Levis and Anthony Richardson, who had higher S2 cognition tests. We're not as good as CJ Stroud in those circumstances. So again, there's a lot of different factors that play there, but it's not like CJ Stroud was out there looking like a chicken running around with his head cut off. It was really not a factor until a lot of this S2 started coming up. Black Rain, I got to tell you again, I thought this was real. Why give people false hope? Man, it says mock draft, bud. Yeah, I believe. Let's see, Texans mock draft reaction. It's a mock draft, man. I don't know what to tell you. If you don't know what a mock draft is, I can't be responsible for that. So, as far as, let's see, James Palmer, CJ Stroud threw what PFF designates a perfectly placed pass on 26.7% of his attempts in 2021 and 2022, the highest of any player in the FBS. All those yardages, touchdowns, and deep passes ranked second in the Power 5 over the 2021 and 2022 seasons. I think this is important as far as, like, in Ohio State, people get really sensitive about this, and I understand why. When people say, well, CJ Stroud didn't have to throw into tight windows, this, that, the other thing. He did have to throw into tight windows, not as frequently as some other quarterbacks, but whether it's a tight window or not, like in both circumstances, he did a really good job of just lacing the ball right in there and just doing those things that do transfer very readily to the NFL. That's why I like Tyree Wilson, the defensive end, because I think he does a lot of things that readily transfer to the NFL. As far as CJ Stroud, I think he does a lot that, especially in this Texans offense, translates to the NFL. Some of the negatives you saw about him earlier, about not being able to get his hips square and when he's throwing on the run and those things, those matter with the Texans. But I think that CJ is so good mechanically that that's going to be stuff that gets better when the level of competition gets higher, just naturally. This is James Palmer, by the way, with a little... As we move on to the Will Anderson portion of this mock draft, this report by James Palmer kind of got me going. It's a combination of what James Palmer is saying about Will Anderson and the background music as well.
Of all the calls I made this past weekend, Andrew, a lot of teams say they don't really know exactly what the Texans are doing. Their hunch is Tyree Wilson, and the edge rusher out of Texas Tech. Obviously, there's a lot of traits there. A couple of teams told me it's a Bosa-type build and body that just doesn't come around very often. You know where DeMeco Ryans just left with Nick Bosa and the San Francisco 49ers. The ceiling and potential is so high with Tyree Wilson, and that's a name that several teams told me they think the Texans are leaning. What I find interesting in that full-screen graphic we just showed there is Will Anderson's name is nowhere to be found, with the Texans going with him with number 2. And talking to a couple of teams, they told me, this is a generational human being, not just as good of a football player as he is. And remember, he only took 3 official visits. It was the Texans, it was the Lions, and it was the Seahawks. Now, one team put it to me this way: Baldy, it was DeMeco would be drafting DeMeco. That's how type of a leader he is. That's how he would run your locker room. And the interesting aspect from other teams is, if you're looking to change your culture and you're looking to turn things over with a new head coach and a new regime, with DeMeco Ryans, this is the type of player that could essentially run your defense for the next decade. And, he's still very, very good at football as well. It's interesting, Baldy, that you don't see his name on a single one of those mock projections at number 2.
We've got it. This was obviously before Daniel Jeremiah, who's also on the NFL Network, did his mock draft. And then I've got Albert Breers on here in a little bit too. We'll take a look at his because he doesn't have CJ Stroud going. He's got Tyree Wilson going. But that part there, Sean Pendergast this morning said something interesting, which is like, hey, isn't it? It's not really fair to say that he's going to be like D'Amico Ryans, at least in terms of leadership, because D'Amico, aside from being very mature and being a very good natural leader, he was also the middle linebacker, so he's calling the plays, he's directing traffic, he's doing all of those things. I think that part's fair. I do think that there is something to be said, even though I like Tyree Hill and I like Tyree Wilson. I thought Tyree's film this year was better than Will Anderson's film this year. I don't think this is like me projecting Tyree Wilson or anything. It's just I thought he was better this year. But the thing about Anderson is he's been really, really good at Alabama for 3 straight years. And my one concern was exactly how the Texans would be using him. I know one of you had suggested early on, like, Hassan Reddick from the Eagles, maybe they'll use him like that as a Sam linebacker who's basically a defensive end. So I was excited when I saw Kay Adams talking to Will Anderson, and she asked him about how the Texans were going to use him.
You went to Texas. You had meetings. How did they go?
It went great. The staff was great. The facility was great. The people were great. The players were cool. I had a really good time there. And the way they want to use me is special.
How do they want to use you?
Just a non-tech, off the edge, rushing to go to get the quarterback.
Yeah, Ryans, did you get to sit with him?
Yeah, of course. And that's
what stuck out about him? I hear so much about him. He's amazing.
Yeah, he is. I think just the mindset he has, he's a Bama guy, so it was kind of just, easy to, to relate to some of the stuff that he was saying, but it was cool, laid back, you know what I'm saying? And he's going to do something really special there.
He's going to, hopefully, maybe with you at number 2 overall. I would certainly like to see it.
So, again, for those of you just joining, Daniel Jeremiah had the Texans take CJ Stroud number 2 overall, and then they had them, and then he had him trade up to number 3 for a reasonable price, not as much as the 49ers had to pay to get up to Trey Lance. I doubt that happens, but it'd be pretty damn cool if it did. A couple things about what they just said there. One is they talk about him being a 9 technique. A 9 technique means you're outside the tight end, or if there's no tight end, you're a wide technique, cocked and turned towards the quarterback, and you just get upfield and go. And not necessarily dropping into coverage a whole lot, just being a defensive end. And Reddick with the Eagles does this. I think the one thing I would say about Anderson and what he's going to have to do if he's going to be like Hassan Reddick is be more violent. Like he's not big enough to overpower guys in the NFL the way he did some of the smaller guys in the SEC. So when you watch Reddick play, who's not a huge guy, like he gets extremely low and then just explodes into people. And I think that Anderson has that ability. He just hasn't quite shown it. And it's not so simple to just think like, well, he can do it once he gets up into the league. Like there's something to that. He doesn't use his hands as well as a pass rusher as he does in run stuffing, which is interesting because as a smaller guy, like he really has to use his hands against the run, and he does a good job of it. There's a lot of good instances of him being pretty physical versus big guys in the run, but then as a pass rusher, it kind of stops, and he's not going to be fast enough to run around a guy like Laramie Tunsil. He's going to have to do a combination of speed. I mean, he can if he sets it up, but he's going to have to use a combination of speed and power. So I'm not quite there yet with the projection on it. But I like the kid so much. Here's just a fun little one from him is him being asked like, why was he such a good little brother to his big sisters?
I'm the best little brother because I always looked out for them, and I never snitched on any of them.
Uh-huh.
You never snitched. I want you on that's the kind of guy you want in a locker room, NFL teams. You're moving up. You're shooting up the draft boards. Humble swag here.
Okay, so by the way, and that is Kay Adams. She does a really good job on these interviews. Guy's very comfortable with her, but she it's called Up and Adams, and it's I want to say on FanDuel, but it's on YouTube if you just look up and Adams, and I'll try to remember to link that later. Somebody just tweet me or something if I forget to link these. Sometimes I feel like a jerk for using their content. So we've got Daniel Jeremiah. Daniel Jeremiah thinks that the Texans in his mock draft, and Daniel Jeremiah is not a wild dude. You know, he's pretty buttoned up. He's got the Texans taking CJ Stroud because he thinks that that's just what a team that needs a quarterback should do when a guy like CJ Stroud is available. I think that Daniel Jeremiah, who was a scout in the NFL and is, I think, open to all the analytics and using them, but a lot of it is with quarterbacks. He just feels like CJ Stroud is ready to go. And he's the best guy after Bryce Young, who won't likely be available. And if you're too afraid of Bryce Young's size, then maybe the very guy that you wanted is right there for you. So I think that, though, is not based on anything he's hearing. I don't think anybody out there right now is really getting a lot of good information. So I've got people, I'll tell you, this is what's going on in my world. People out there know that I generally don't say anything to anybody. Like, as far as like when I've got information or I know a story about something, like I'll use it to inform my opinion, but it's very rare that I'll tell another person just because I want to be somebody that people trust. So it's nice sometimes, like I get information that I don't really do anything with it. It makes me unpopular in some media circles because there's a give and a take, you know. So I've had more people like text and call me asking like, "Hey man, you got anything on the Texans?" Like, people who know I don't do it, like they're calling around everybody trying to figure out what the hell the Texans are doing. Nobody knows. So it's a mega scoop for the first person who ever figures out what it actually is. Let me check let's see. Nope, nothing from you guys so far. I figured you guys would tell me if there was something that I'd missed. So here, we'll get to Breer. And Breer is not buying that they'll take CJ Stroud. In his mock draft, he has Tyree Wilson, who I because I'm a little bit nervous about Tyree Wilson's foot. I saw somebody on there say that they'd been convinced by me talking about Tyree Wilson. I'm nervous about his foot. I know he's passed the physical with the Cardinals. That doesn't necessarily mean that, like, hey, he's A-okay and ready to go today. It's that he could play football, but we saw with Kevin Johnson where there was hardware in his foot. If the Texans, this is where I'm positioned well, though. I've been saying I think that D'Amico would like Tyree Wilson better. Okay. So if they take Will Anderson instead of Tyree Wilson, I'm just going to say, well, obviously it was the medical concerns. So that's and you'll never be able to knock me off of that. Even if D'Amico comes out and like writes a book about the process, you'll never be able to say that I was wrong on that. I'll refuse. I will never relent. So the drumbeat on this one has gotten louder, and I've heard that Wilson passed his physical with the Texans. Will Anderson Jr. would be the safer pick, and he shares Alabama ties with new coach D'Amico Ryans. But Wilson's a stronger scheme fit, I agree, for what Ryans is going to build in Houston, has a higher ceiling. And that's where I am. I've seen a lot of people push back and say, Seth, you only like Tyree Wilson because of the upside or because of the potential. No, I think he was a better football player this year. Like, I just thought when I watched Tyree Wilson, he made it look more like what I told Sean was the parents in the stands of an offensive tackle stopped telling people around them who their son was. They're kind of just like, oh, I don't know. That's just, no, we're just here watching the football game. Like, he embarrassed people. And frankly, they should be ashamed of themselves. This is where it gets stupid. Can't have it. I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know how I'm going to talk to people if Will Levis gets drafted by the Texans. I don't get it. I don't see it. I don't want it. I haven't seen a person yet who's genuinely excited about him, or at least is saying it in a way that I believe them. And I'm talking about like, you know, scouts, former quarterbacks. You know, I've shown a few of them on here. I feel like there's a lot of excuse making for him, and they might be valid excuses, but there's just too much to worry about. And not to mention, I don't know. I don't want to get into the Nolan Rocky territory and start talking about a guy's personality or anything, but I'm just not buying it. I'm not buying it. That Levis is the guy. I know he can throw and hit the goalpost from his knees on the 50-yard line. And if you think that means anything, then I would love to sell you I would like to sell you Jamarcus Russell. I'll give you a Jamarcus Russell in my, what is it called when you have the legacy leagues or whatever? Like, it's just, it's a Zach Wilson parlor trick, you know? Wow, Zach Wilson, look at these magical throws, unbelievable. Can't do it. This is going to be Albert Breer explaining himself. right before his mock draft came out, but showing where he was leaning with Rich Eisen, whose go-to take on the Texans is, what are the Texans doing? How can they not draft a quarterback?
If you just look at the history of the two guys, okay? And I think it's still a discussion point for them. And I think if Bryce were to fall to 2, I think they probably would take him. I think it's still a discussion point if Bryce is gone, what they're going to do. And I think that could be Will Anderson. It's been called to my attention. Like, you look at D'Amico, right? And look at Nick Caserio, the two guys who are making decisions. Nick Caserio has been in the NFL for 23 years. He's never taken a quarterback or been part of a team that took a quarterback higher than 62nd overall. That was Jimmy Garoppolo, right? And then you look at D'Amico's history. D'Amico was part of a team that drafted a quarterback 3rd overall and traded 3 first-round picks for him. That was Trey Lance. And the Niners got to 3 NFC championship games with quarterbacks not named Trey Lance, right? And with 2 different quarterbacks not named Trey Lance.
Right.
So, you look at that history, and then, D'Amico was a part of a team that had the 2nd pick 4 years ago. They took Nick Bosa. That turned out pretty well. You know what I mean? So you start to put the pieces together, and ownership's going to have a say in this, and I'm sure ownership is gung-ho on the quarterbacks and all the rest of that, I just think it's a complicated thing if you're not as sure, and so I don't think they're as sure what they're going to do yet. I'm not sure that it's going to be a quarterback at 2nd overall. I could very easily see that being Tyree Wilson or Will Anderson.
So I mean, he makes some strong points, but I feel like Breer, who has been in the past at least plugged into the Texans, and I think some of that might have been more based on Bill O'Brien, but I think he's got a relationship with Caserio. I think he's pretty openly just using logic there. It's not like he's necessarily breaking news or acting like he's breaking news. And I think there is something to that. If you don't really get your juices moving by any of these quarterbacks, then why would you not take an edge rusher that you think can actually, have a really good chance of being an impact player for 10 or 15 years? And that's one of the arguments. Sean brought this up this morning. It's really good about not taking a running back that high. Is that, you could say, well, hey, take Bijan Robinson and he'll be awesome. And maybe it's only for 4 or 5 years. Who cares? Well, because you could take an edge rusher that works out and ends up being 10 or 15 years if you play your cards right. And it's a higher probability than at quarterback. So if you really don't like the quarterbacks, then why are you swinging on it? That's why honestly, I like Anthony Richardson, because I feel like it's boom or bust. It's either going to be a blast or it's going to suck. As far as what Cooper had asked, looking back, do we consider Mario Williams a bad pick? I feel Wilson will turn out to be similar, a lot of hype. I don't know. I wonder if you're Cooper. I don't know. I wonder if you're thinking more of Jadeveon Clowney. Both those situations for the Texans, unfortunately, came when the Texans made the mistake of sucking the year before there really weren't any good quarterback prospects. So with Mario, the controversy was over whether Reggie Bush, Vince Young, or Mario should be the pick. And at first, people just torched the Texans for it. Ultimately, Mario did end up being the better pick. Of the guys, presumably that you might take up there at the top of the draft. So I think that was a good pick. Clowney, you could have questions about, obviously, but it's rare that the guy it's rare that anybody really justifies being the number 1 overall pick. The expectations are so high when in reality, there's usually probably not even separating that guy that much from the other top 10 or top 5 guys. So the stats would suggest you're going to be disappointed by your top 10 pick. So I don't know. I don't know if it's even relevant to right now. As far as the Tyree Wilson part goes, I just feel I think he's a better football player than people are giving him credit for. I worry about that a little foot of his. So as far as Will Levis goes, since the Texans were rumored to be in on Will Levis, and then Will Levis was rumored to have gone number 1 overall. This was Will Levis being asked about these latest rumors that he was going to be the pick for the Panthers, or was second favored pick to go to the Panthers.
As a user on Reddit said that you've contacted your friends and family and told them you're going to Carolina number 1. Can you comment on that? Is that true? All
I have to say is don't believe everything you read on the internet.
All right.
Well, there's not many
He looked pissy, man.
User on Reddit.
Let me run this again. I think I might have put it on here too. So we want to. There we go. He looks pissy, which I get it. But there's just there's something about this guy, and whether it's the lack of gushing about his actual football playing ability, the rumors that his personality might not be the greatest or whatever. I don't know how much of that is just smoke out there. Various people have reported that a lot of teams have him as a second-round pick. I don't get excited by Will Levis. He's going to be the toughest one for me to really talk myself into. I'll watch his highlight reels. I'll watch nothing but his highlight reels for maybe 72 hours on a loop, and I'll get excited about the upside. There's certain things about his decision making. You know what you got to do actually is watch the 2021 tape, because the 2021 games he looked like a different guy in a lot of respects, and it may be as simple as the offensive coordinator. I just don't need all of those excuses made for him. So this is Bryce Young commenting about whether he knows where he's going or not.
This quarterback of why nobody went to his.
Look at that. I got the wrong audio going on over everything. All right, well, we'll cut those out then. Let me get out of here. Let me take some of these questions, everybody. I know everybody's getting super tense. I'll start from the back and go to the front. Don't draft another player with injuries. Our top 3 picks last year all had injuries at the draft. Hold on one second. I want to fact check something. So, first of all, you know what? Very, 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 very valid about Derek Stingley. I mean, Derek Stingley, my objection on draft night, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back or anything here. I wish I was really wrong about this, but my objection on draft night was that he was that he hadn't really had a good year in 3 years, and that he also had been banged up, injured, COVID, but you can't really blame. You know what? No, in the spirit of these modern times, I'll blame him for COVID. I'm gonna get up on a cable news station, pick whichever one you hate the most, and I'm gonna start talking about how Derek Stingley is responsible for COVID. Kenyon Green, Jalen Petrie. I don't remember, what was Jalen Petrie's injury when they picked him, or are you thinking of John Mechie and just his? I mean, John Mechie had leukemia. They didn't know he had leukemia. So I don't know. He was out there, by the way, at OTAs the other day. But yeah, I'm with you though. I'm with you, Jeff. I would prefer that they stay away from guys who might be injury prone. And that's, unfortunately, I'm waking up in sweats over Tyree Wilson. If the Texans take him, I hope it's because his foot just looks A-okay. The hardware is out and all of that. I'm excited. Nothing better than watching my favorite former Texans D-line and waiting on the draft. Yay! Don't draft another player with injuries. Oh, I already got that, Lynn. Is Clowney available in free agency? Why not get your QB at number 2 and then go get Clowney in free agency? Here's the thing about Clowney. I don't know what he was thinking. Last year, I might have to do a little video on this one. Last year, the very end of the season for the Browns, in a lost season, he went to Mary Kay Cabot, who writes for Cleveland.com now, I believe. She used to be with the Plain Dealer, and just flat out told her that they weren't using him properly, and he was tired, or he didn't like the fact that Myles Garrett was getting schemed open, that they were scheming Myles Garrett open and doing all these things specifically for Myles Garrett. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? They sent him home. The Browns sent him home, from work. And for the rest of the year. So this is what Clowney is at this stage in his career. He's going to be signing 1-year deals and going places, and he needs to be a good soldier. And he wasn't a good soldier in that instance. I don't know what he was doing. So it's highly unlikely. I think they have their older defensive end in Jerry Hughes, who was really effective last year and just did it silently on a team that was going against teams that had really no need to throw or to press. And he had the same amount of pressures as he typically does in one of his really, really good years. So I think Jerry Hughes is going to be that guy for this year. A lot more questions here. And I apologize, but I have to go get my haircut before our draft broadcast. Watch the left tackle NC film and then Anderson's film. Anderson is 1 inch taller and 12 to 15 pounds heavier. Same tenacity. Oh, you're talking about Lawrence Taylor? Who are you talking about there? Inch taller, same tenacity, play recognition, multiple pass rushing moves, good against the run. I disagree about the multiple pass rushing moves. I really, really vehemently disagree against that. He has not impressed me as a talented pass rusher or actually anybody that like has a good combination of speed and power versus the better players. Like he runs around a lot. I love the way he plays. I love his potential. I really, really do. But a lot of what he does is beating up on college kids because he's a badass. I really, really like him. I just this putting him up on a pedestal is some kind of an incredible. Like go watch his combine drills. Watch him in coverage. Like he's not this superhuman that people are painting him out to be. I just don't get it. I don't get it. And maybe it's me. Maybe I'm wrong and I'm just not seeing it right. I watched a bunch of complete games of Anderson, and I don't get that part of it. So I thought Tyree Wilson was just a much better player on film this year. I got to go. I got to get my haircut. Thanks, everybody.